Welcome to the Voices of Manufacturing with your hosts, Brian Salee and Michael Mullenberg, where business leaders across the industry share their unique challenges and insights.
It's almost like magic because it takes the learning process sometimes from weeks down to days, sometimes hours.
We want to help people within manufacturing and make them excited to come to work every day and go home safe to their family.
When you bring people in, they're anything but a machine. They're partners that can help you build your business, that can be your success if you treat them right.
And then you start having employees saying, when are you doing my machine? When are you going to come over here to my department? And now you get this buy-in.
This podcast is brought to you by Dazuki, the premier frontline digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations.
Hey, Michael, lately you've been working with some smaller manufacturers. I know you've been doing some consulting work, and I'm really interested, you spent 37 years at 3M, which is just a massive manufacturer. I think at one point 3M had 90,000 employees or something like that. Could you contrast working at a big company like that versus working with some of these smaller companies? What are some of the differences you notice in terms of culture and just the way they run operations?
Yeah, Brian, that's a great question. I've been reflecting on that for the past year. What's different? What's the same? What are the pros and the cons? And maybe a couple of comments. One is there's a perception that large companies have a lot more resources and you can just pull a chain and get capital or people. And it's a little bit of a misconception. It's nice to have air cover. It's nice to have a corporate overseeing group, but that doesn't always mean the resources. In the smaller companies, they don't assume they've got that resource coming. And so they just dig for it. They justify it, they go for it. They're not waiting for a handout from corporate. And the same is true of the culture. I think there's a larger corporate culture, but the culture at an individual location or even within an individual value stream or group of workers is also part of the equation. So the smaller companies don't have that corporate culture to worry about. Their culture is what you see on the shop floor, and there's not another layer. But I reflect and I say, a typical manufacturing site of 500-600 employees would have a very similar culture, sphere that a small company would have, because they really operate somewhat independently around the leadership they have on the site. So it's, again, it's not better or worse. It's just different. Where do you get help? Where do you get influence? Where do you get initiatives, ideas, strategies? It's got to come from somewhere. And it's a little bit more direct in the smaller companies, which is a nice change for me personally.
I've noticed the same thing. I think the thing you're pointing out here too is like, especially when you're a larger company and you have multiple plants, that culture really is specific to each location a lot of times. Yeah. And I've also noticed too, I think one of the things that, depending on the type of manufacturing, but I really notice this in food and beverage, the plant manager could be pretty influential in the culture of the company, which I don't see that as much in other industries. Maybe that's just the companies that I've worked with, but that's been interesting too. It's just the impact of that plant manager.
Yeah. It's also real interesting to see when even smaller companies, when they have multiple sites, not so much the cultural differences, but even understanding how those sites communicate back and forth, sharing ideas, sharing people resources, helping with, surge capacity or training or whatever. Often that spirit of collaboration is a real indicator of, kind of what kind of culture they have, whether it be a small, a company that has maybe 3 sites or a company that has 200 sites. It's still a great leading indicator to look at how collaborative they really are.
Yeah, that's a great indicator. Well, I was curious. I wanted to ask you that question because we've got a great guest today. I want to welcome Andrew Murphy to the show. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey guys.
Hey, well,
Thanks for having me.
Andrew, you work for a company called Norman Noble. You mind giving us a little bit of background on the company and your role there?
Sure. Norman Noble is a medical device manufacturer. It's a contract manufacturer in Northeast Ohio, in Cleveland. Been here since 1946. I've been around a long time. Didn't start in med device, started in some other things and transitioned over the years. Really got their big break in med device, I'd say maybe 15 to 20 years ago. And has just really transitioned to being entirely focused around the medical devices. It's a growing company. They've grown about tenfold over the past 15 years, just huge growth, which has been really, really good for the people that work here, and good for the company in the area. Primarily focused around stents and other implantable medical devices, a few instruments and things like that, but a lot of really interesting and complicated processes involving nitinol and other exotic metals that really add a layer of challenge to applying things like lean and continuous improvement, which is my role at the company. So I've been here about 3 years.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you guys have been transitioning from a smaller contract manufacturer and growing very rapidly, it sounds like, over the last couple decades. Tell us a little bit more about your role at the company, because I think we talked about it a little bit before. The company's going through this transition from, I guess you would call it a job shop type of mentality to more of a corporate structure. But tell us a little bit about your role and kind of how you're supporting that transition of the company.
Yeah, I think, well, my role really is to drive that change. And with that has come quite a few challenges all on its own. So the company, yes, it's in the middle of a transition, I'd say, from a mom and pop to a larger corporate organization and multiple sites now in other places. And that sort of happened before they established a strategic vision to do that, right? So with that comes its own challenges. You've got sort of the old structure where there's people who own certain processes, and they're the expert that was here when that process was established. And to try and break that sort of thing down without threatening everybody and making it feel like the whole world is falling apart underneath them has been kind of the main challenge. Because really, what we're trying to do, what they hired me to do, is to come in and implement lean manufacturing, right? Which is a giant, broad statement, right? If anybody involved in lean knows it, and someone says, "Can you come put lean into our factory?" It's going to be a lot bigger challenge than just teaching people 5S or something like that. It's a complete culture shift. And so what we've had to do is kind of go back to bare bones and look at the whole organization, and how do we take it from where we are now, which is a successful organization that has grown and we're profitable. We're doing very well as a company, but we need to change, because if we're going to be around for 75 more years, we're going to need to approach that future differently than we've approached the past. And so but it's not easy, because you have a lot of people who are used to doing it the way they've done it. And the way they've done it has worked. So why change? And so there's been a lot of challenges around that. So a lot of my work now is focused around, I'd say, the root cause stuff, the baseline elements of the organization that will help us to implement a continuous improvement culture. Things like training, things like supply management, things like freeing up space so we can even do 5S, that kind of thing. So a lot of involvement on digitization and moving kind of into the digital age with some of the systems that we have, so that they function for people instead of people working around things. A lot of things that didn't really fit into the traditional kind of implement lean objective that I was given when I took the job, but are necessary in order to get to that point. So it's been a little bit of a take a few steps back before we get started position, but honestly, I've learned a ton, and we're making a lot of really good progress.
I want to circle in on culture, because I think that's the area when companies go through a transition like this. Like you mentioned, there's people who have owned these processes for a long time. They probably created the processes. And now you're saying, hey, well, let's reevaluate how we're doing things. How do you manage that? I don't want to call it's not change management, but it's a mindset shift. It's a cultural change. Like, how do you get people to let go of the reins a little bit, where they've had a lot of control in the past, and have kind of this broader vision for the company?
I think it comes down to leadership. I think you have to lead. That's not a change that you can just manage. You just put in place a new process and then see how it goes. It's leadership. You have to set a vision that's clear, that people can understand why you would need to go from where we are to where we want to be. So you have to clearly define that. I think that's the first step. And that's where we've started, to say, who do we want to be in the next 10 to 15 years? And that's still, I'd say, in the works, getting that really to be clarified for everybody. Because when you don't have that, everybody does that for themselves. They build their own vision of where they see things going, and then they work on that. I don't think that people can work just every day and not have some sort of future in mind. And so unless the company gives them that, gives someone that future vision, and the vision hopefully that matters to them more than just day-to-day work, then they put it in place themselves. And so the company is right now figuring out, how do we move to that new vision? What's that new vision look like, so that we can make sense of all this stuff? And then it really needs to be led by the owner of that vision. And I think without that, that's kind of the key struggle, is how do you get people to move from where they are to where you want them to be, unless you know where that's going, where you're going. Right. So that's kind of the main challenge. I think that the key to shift from a short-term focus to long-term focus starts there. It starts with having that vision that matters, that root, that just cause, if you will. What is the purpose for this organization beyond the day-to-day function? And so that's a lot of what we're working on now. And then after that, I think once you have that figured out, you're talking about establishing routines that will help you take people who are used to day-to-day work and have them do day-to-day work that now gets you closer and closer to where you want to go. And they can start to see the benefits of working towards something that's a shared vision and not that individual one.
With all that growth you're experiencing, that probably requires a lot of effort. It's a great problem to have, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of growing and business expanding. And when I was in modes like that, it was like, okay, you got new people coming in, new ideas, maybe new processes that are required, and even new products and new ways of, manufacturing, maybe even new technology. So how do you manage all that? That's all got to be coming at you as you grow. And what's the ratio, or what's the counterbalance to keep up with that? That's a lot of things happening at once.
It is. And honestly, it comes down to, partly it's prioritization. It's, triage.
Yeah.
What can we manage to keep from getting in the way of the ultimate goal? And then having that ultimate goal. What are we actually trying to do, so that we don't get bogged down with every single battle, right? Because you can't fight every single thing at once. And there's some things that we have to just kind of let go. Say, okay, maybe we're making some decisions on some equipment choice that maybe aren't the best for what we're trying to do, or making some decisions on how to organize this production line that aren't necessarily the most in keeping with what we want to be in terms of lean. But in the short run, this is a small piece that we can adjust later. And if we fight the battle now, we're not fighting the mindset, we're fighting the actions. And we need to spend the energy on the mindset, so that later we have more people making better decisions on their own, rather than just trying to tell people what to do. We're kind of teaching people how to fish rather than giving them the fish themselves. And I think especially in a mom and pop organization, or I hate to say mom and pop, it's kind of got a derogatory kind of connotation now, but an organization that grew through its bootstraps, right? Brought itself up from a garage shop into a multi-site, multi-country, multi-million-dollar organization. You want to get people to see why you're doing it rather than telling them what to do. And I think there's a tendency in organizations like ours to, when you're in firefighting mode for a long, long time, you default to doing what you're told, right? The decisions are getting made by a small group of people, because there's the autonomy of the people to make decisions down on the shop floor is low. They're pitching the problems up, because it used to be just one person. They would just ask their friend, basically, hey, how should we do this? And they would tell them, you would move on from there. But as the organization grows tenfold and you add layers of hierarchy, and you can't do that anymore, you end up with a whole lot of people who aren't able to make decisions with very much autonomy, and you're bogging down the leadership. And so I think for me, the way that I'm approaching that, trying to guide the organization, and teaching leaders how to teach other leaders, so that we can establish that. And that's where those routines come in when you're trying to transition to that longer term thinking, is having routines that reinforce the ability for you to develop people at the next level down to make decisions appropriate for their levels. Teach them how to see the issues in the way that you want them to see them, instead of how to fix things, how to look at things. And so it's a challenge for sure.
Yeah. Andrew, this is a really great point, because Michael, what I'm thinking about, we interviewed Bill Tomlinson from Volvo Mack Trucks on the previous episode. And Andrew, this is exactly what he talked about, is this coaching. You have to coach them.
Yeah.
They have a great continuous improvement culture there, but they've coached their employees around Kaizen and what it means to identify problems and how to think about solving them and how to be collaborative. And it's been an ongoing process. And so I would like to hone in on this mindset shift, and how do you, coach people to change their mindset to where it is different. It's not so reactive and let's just put a Band-Aid on this so we can hit our production targets today. What are some of the systems, tools, things you're doing to kind of, change the mindset of individuals in operations?
I mean, a lot of that comes down to just having interactions with people on a one-on-one basis. And that in and of itself is probably the most challenging thing, right? You got to have a formula, a standard way of approaching problems. I think that is kind of a baseline fundamental, is that you have to have a way to look at things. So it's not just your way versus someone else's way. This is the standard way we're going to approach these types of problems. And there's lots of ways to look at problems, right? And there's 5 whys and there's DMAIC and there's a million different ways you can do these things, and they all work in their own, different settings. But I think what has to happen is you have to have people in leadership positions who know how to coach their people to see the issues. And then you have to have them going after those conditions, the target conditions in the area where they're looking, not just the targets. I think this is the most challenging part of any shift and the main difference, I think, between a lean organization and a traditional manufacturing organization is the traditional manufacturing side. Your goal is to solve the problem as quickly as you can and get back to equilibrium. And on a lean organization, your goal is to learn from the problem so that you can spread that knowledge out and never have the problem return. And I think that's why in traditional manufacturing organizations, you see repeated problems coming back over and over and over again, and everybody turning to the guy who solved it last time to say, oh, that guy takes care of that kind of stuff. And so I think that's the key, is to have patience, to have people coaching people below them on how to see the issues, not giving them the answer, but teaching them how to see these issues. And I think for that to happen, the coach also needs to know how to see the issues. So it really comes down to everybody being willing to think about things differently and then applying that in a routine. And the routine that we have established right now we call it the daily management system. And I think there's tons of iterations of daily management systems. Everybody has their own. Ours is a 3-tier daily management system, starts on the shop floor, the information. So there's this thing that's been banging around in my head lately, which I don't know if there's a term for it. I call it the information authority dichotomy. People on the floor, people at the process know every piece of information about what's going wrong or what's going right, why things are working, why they're not, but they don't have any of the authority to take action to address those issues. And then as you go up in the hierarchy, you have less information and more authority. So the authority and decisions are getting made up at the top, and then it's not translating its way back down again. And you have tons of inefficiency and waste coming from that. And so DMS is supposed to kind of break that up into chunks so that it's easier to see where you need to bridge those gaps between authority and information and authority. So our DMS is structured like that. It's supposed to be 3 tiers going up and 3 tiers going down. So three layers of information. Level 1 is your operators, your process level, led by the lead or the supervisor of the department. Next layer up is our managers of each department that meet with all of the leaders of their level 1s. And then up from there is the site leadership, and our level 3 is the director of operations, who's in charge of all of the production managers. And then from there downward goes the coaching. So the director of operations then goes and spends time with each production manager, looking at their problems, looking at their processes, coaching them on how to see the issues in the way that we want them to be seen and talked about. Because I think the way you describe a problem is the way you solve the problem. And so we want to coach people on how to do that. And then from there, those managers are learning how to see and how to coach. And then they translate that down to the people on the floor, how to see problems and everything else. We have a standard sort of, it's a board. It's a dry erase board with a format on it so people can fill it out correctly. We call it low tech, high touch process. So lots of people wanted us to start right off the bat with digital boards and all kinds of other stuff. And I said, until we have the discipline to stand here for 5 minutes a day and meet about the problems, we're not going to get much out of a digital board. So our goal is to get that going. It's going, but to get it to be very robust and really the right messages getting translated to each level, leaders getting developed at each level. And then we'll start to digitize that process. So probably got another year or so before we're ready for the first digital board. Yeah, at each layer you're looking at. Sorry,
I love that comment about the coaching down at the different layers, because one of the coaching failure modes is we don't practice enough. So this structure that you described forces people to do it every day. And it might be a small problem, it might be a big problem, but it's muscle memory. And so that structure allows that. And I love your comment about digital or analog or high touch. That's also muscle memory. If you skip
Right.
a muscle memory phase, you'll get ahead of yourself. So I think that's very wise. Start, practice, learn. The digital solution will come down the road. And then think about this. I was going to reflect back on this. With growth also comes the opportunity for new equipment and maybe some bigger challenges that in a company that's not growing, they never get a chance to solve the big problems. But because you're growing, you probably have some big problems that you also get to practice on. And again, use that as a learning thing and just drive that, through the same process you described. So your coach is the mundane and sort of the special big things at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a
I'm
really
cur-
solid structure.
I'm curious, this question is for both of you really is you talk about coaching down, right? And so that means your leaders at the top need to be really good at coaching because they're setting the example for the leaders below them and it trickles down as you're saying. How are you preparing the leaders at the top to do this type of coaching? Because, from what I've seen, a lot of manufacturers don't practice lean and they're not doing daily management systems. And so,
Yeah.
how do you develop that skill set? Because it is unique, it's the opposite of being the hero, right? I can go solve the problem myself versus I'm coaching you, teaching you to think about the problem, asking you questions so that you can solve it on your own. But I'm curious, yeah, how do you develop that,
Yeah.
that, mindset with folks?
You want to go first, Mike, or you want me to jump into that?
Well, I'll make one comment first is there, we've had leaders that use sort of that kata, the Toyota kata questions. And for somebody that's really just starting the process and starting learning to coach, I find that very effective. It's a script. The questions are meaningful. Maybe the extension of that is when you have standards in place or processes are a little more stable, you might tweak that and start asking more about the standard. Are we following it? Are we trained? Are we deviating today? Um, and then maybe the third, pillar is you get to there's a couple books about Gemba walks, one by Michael Bremer, I think one by Jim Womack, and they're even at a higher level. They're coaching problem solving, they're coaching culture, they're coaching, behaviors. I mean, it's pretty all inclusive. And so you might take a leader through those different phases, get their feet wet, let them practice, let them kind of evolve their style with their experience, their confidence. So that's kind of the way I approach it for somebody that's maybe new to this. But I'm curious as to your thoughts within your structure and especially your growth. You're bringing new people in as well.
Yeah, we actually found out pretty quickly that even people who are in senior level positions don't necessarily know how to coach anybody when they've been in at least coach people in this way, right? They're used to kind of the annual review type of a coaching model where we meet with everybody and we tell them how they're doing and how they need to do next year. And then the rest of the year, we just work together. And that works when you're small, I think, and you have a very intimate relationship with everybody in the organization that's driving any sort of change or improvement. But when you get bigger and your team gets larger and your team gets less familiar to you, you have to have a standard. And we have not launched Kata yet, but that's the plan, is to train our managers and our directors on how to use the Kata process for coaching. We're actually hoping, I haven't got approval yet, we're hoping to go to the Skill Point workshop out in Indiana, where they have kind of a mock assembly line set up where you learn and practice applying a Kata process. We're going to do that with TWI Institute and Lean Frontiers. And so far, though, we've trained all of our managers to two other TWI tools, which is job relations, which really focuses on treating people with respect. I met with some colleagues out here from another company who have been doing TWI job relations for a number of years, and described JR, as we call it, as operationalized respect for people. I thought that was a great way of describing job relations. And because it really helps give to someone who's never had any sort of context given to them around how they should be interacting with somebody at work, a way to approach problems, right? Gives that 4-step method and also introduces the idea of a standard. It's a reaction standard and also just a regular standard for how to treat people on a regular basis. And so we've actually just done a survey of our organization to say, hey, we've trained all of our leaders, how are they doing? And so we've got a lot of work to do still, but we now have some pretty good indicators on where to go with that. The other tool we deployed already is job instruction through TWI. So job instruction, lots and lots of weaknesses there because most of our training was just ad hoc OJT. And unfortunately, a lot of the training, now there's formal training, but it's read the work instruction, go do the work kind of work instruction, which is not effective, right? In a real setting to say, read this document, then go do the job, right? And everybody reads the document, they understand the document, but then they go to do the job and that kind of all falls apart as you're looking at all the parts there in front of you and you need to learn what to do. You're asking someone, hey, how do I do this? And TWI bridges that gap, gives that trainer who's getting asked, hey, how do I do this? A way to train that's effective and efficient with their time and with their energy, because it gives them this really solid process and sort of guarantees that if the process is followed and you've done the work to prepare, that the person will come away with good understanding how to do that job. And that has helped a lot. So in the areas where we've really applied it effectively or correctly, it's made an enormous difference for the people that are over there, being able to duplicate skills that previously were, well, only, this person is able to do that process. And when they're out of town, we don't produce that product or don't get that process step completed. And obviously that's an enormous weakness. So it gives the managers a tool to identify those gaps to say, hey, what sorts of issues are we having this week when we're doing our coaching? As a part of the DMS process, we can look at that and say, we didn't hit our goal here. Why didn't we hit our goal here? Well, we only so can do that. All right. Do we have breakdowns for that? Do we have training for that? When are you going to train someone else? Who are you going to get trained? Rather than it just being pressure, you have a tool and a way out of it. So you're looking at your plan rather than just arguing over why you weren't able to get what you got. So instead of focusing on excuses, focusing on the reasons we missed something, we're focusing on the actions we're going to do to progressively move us into a condition where that sort of thing doesn't happen anymore. Not just get us out of this situation, but get us out of this situation permanently. And so creating those standards for the managers or the leaders that are doing the coaching to follow has been very helpful, but we still have a gap. We need to teach people actually the pattern for coaching, right? I think the, job relations, job instruction, and some other tools like that, even a lot of the lean tools like 5S, 5Ys, all these other things that come into play are much more effective as countermeasures to problems that are found during that kata coaching pattern. And I'm not an expert in kata. I've never had any formal training in kata. I read the book, my brother's book, and talked with people plenty about kata. But I tried to apply the pattern myself. But I've not ever had any formal training, but I see the evidence of it working. And I know that having that pattern is going to really make a big difference for us. So hopefully in August, we'll be sending some folks the first round of kata, official kata training.
Andrew, I was going to ask you, you guys, I've heard you mention the word now, standardizing multiple times, right? You've standardized how you identify and solve problems with daily management. You're standardizing how you do training with job instruction. Are you seeing, in terms of the culture of the company, right? Because that's the big shift is, going from a firefighting type of mentality, moving away from that type of mentality. Yeah. Are you starting to see that happen? Are you starting to see people's mindset shift where, they see a problem and they're not so reactive to it? They're actually digging deeper. Why is that happening?
In some areas we are, and that's really dependent on the kind of this. Right now, it's dependent on the strength of the coach. That's really, and as a part of that DMS process, kind of reinforce those attitudes. Because if you learn something, you go out into an environment where no one ever asks you about things in that framework, you're going to default back to the kind of normal framework. And so we're focusing more on specific areas to try and keep those things going. That's where we're going to apply the training for katas in those areas where we want to get the full kind of gamut of tools deployed. But we are seeing significant amounts of success in the areas where the people have really learned the tools, specifically job relations and job instruction, being able to go in and train people to do everything according to the standard. Really good adoption in some areas, in the areas where we've been able to spend the time to focus to really develop the skill. Because it's a skill, you got to practice it. So where we've had the time to go and apply resources and time to make sure that the training was effective and they understand the tool and they can use the tool without it being kind of I'd say awkward. Oh, we're going to use this tool now. Just when it starts to become muscle memory, that's when it really starts to latch on. And so we had an area, we did an event for job instruction where we went into an area and looked at a process. It was 4 or 5 steps of electropolishing a product. Involved a few different things, loading fixture, very, very detailed, very, very tiny pieces. And there was a lot of variation of yield or quality level between the different operators. There's 2 operators who are very good, never had any problems. And everybody else was kind of all over the map. They'd have good days, they'd have bad days. And there's a lot of finger pointing and a lot of blaming the material, blaming the precondition of the part, blaming the tools and fixtures and everything. And that was just a kind of standard response. Oh, why did we not get our number? Oh, well, we had bad fixtures. Why didn't we not get our number that we needed today? Oh, well, the material, the parts are bad coming to us, right? It's just kind of over and over, same sort of story every day. So we went and we spent 3 days with the team mapping out the process and digging down into each process step, making the breakdowns, following the TWI job instruction method, and then starting to train people. So over the course of 3 weeks, we built 10 job instruction breakdowns. And then we trained, I think it was 6 or 7 people to all of them. And the yields pretty much stabilized across the entire group. So that's been a huge success. Everybody over there now is doing the job the same way. They're all experienced people before. They'd all done the job for a while before. So there was some kind of sensitivity around, why are you teaching me to do this job I've been doing for a number of years? You've never done the job before. Or this person has less experience than me. Why are they teaching me how to do this job? And so working with those people just to understand, we're not criticizing, we're here to help. They saw what we were doing. They engaged with it to their credit. And we saw a significant improvement because we identified by watching them and showing them these breakdowns, hey, this is the best way we decided to do this. And there are a few gaps in the way you're doing it. And they actually learned some tricks. We adopted some tricks, tips and tricks from different people, how they were doing the job, ended up with some pretty good standards of, hey, this is the best way to do this job. And then once we trained everybody to do that, saw a really good stabilization of the quality levels and identified that we have a difference in output levels for totally different reasons. And so now we're working with the manager, actually just yesterday, spent some time with him, coaching him on how to study a process to identify the causes of output variation. It's really those one-on-one kind of areas where we're applying it. But in terms of adopting standards, I think it takes more than just telling people what a standard is and how it's going to help them. It's going and showing them and working with them through the challenges. And for us, interestingly, there's been it's been kind of both ends of the spectrum. There's been a lot of resistance from people to apply standards. Everything we do is different. Everything we do is special. There's no way you can make standards. Standards destroy your creativity, which is that's my favorite argument, that you can't be creative when you have standards. And then on the other end, the people that just immediately adopt it and want to jump in and apply the standards because they've either worked somewhere where they've seen it work, or they know just kind of from logically understanding how they're going to work that this will help everybody. And thankfully, we have enough of the people who are willing to adopt the standards that we've been able to do a lot in terms of creating breakdowns and getting people trained, even to the point that we're moving towards a digital way of improving our standards, taking our older documents, older kind of text-based explanations, paragraph over paragraph, explaining how the process should go to a digital platform that matches the mentality and the step-by-step process of the TWI approach, pulling everything together.
Andrew, the process of creating a job instruction breakdown sheet is a very collaborative process oftentimes, right? You're bringing in all the people who are doing that process. You've got supervisors involved. As you guys went about that process, did other teams observe that process and were able to see how it worked? And was there any, I guess, cool as you're, going about that process, getting other people excited or at least interested in this new way of developing standards?
Yeah, but it's actually just like I mentioned before, the sort of both ends of the spectrum. We'd have people, everyone's always watching whenever the lean people show up out on the floor. Everybody's always kind of looking to see what sorts of damage they're going to cause today. And we have a lot of people who will come up after or come up during and say, when can I get involved in what you're doing? And then on the other side, though, we'll have people who are like, no, thank you. I don't really want anything to do with that, even knowing that it's going to make things a lot easier, a lot better. And so I think that's really just the nature of that's where the coaching has to come in, that routine. That's why you have to start with having a good daily management system and a good coaching pattern, coaching kata that helps people to get engaged and see why it's important to everyone in leadership. So I think that's something we still are not very strong at, is that coaching process. We need to improve that, but we see that's where we see the best benefit is when you're there at the Gemba with the people doing the work. That's when people start to come over and want to talk to you about what you're doing and see where you're. In fact, after we did the event where we worked with the team on the process to build all the breakdowns and identify those kind of gaps to the quality level, I had a number of people come up to me afterwards in the days following, just stop me in the corridor and say, "Hey, I really like what you're doing. I'm glad that we're doing this. We've needed this for a long time." And that's extremely encouraging.
Andrew, have you run into a really difficult skeptic? Like, maybe the worst example you can think of. And is there any phrase or conversation or method that you've used to kind of make that breakthrough with that really, really, really difficult person?
We haven't had anybody, so I haven't had any breakthroughs, unfortunately, with people who've been very difficult. We have had some very difficult people. And really what that shows up as here, in past companies, I've had people who've been just very vocal. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to get involved with this. And I think the company that's where the vision comes in. Like, where are we going to go there or not? Because it depends on how committed we are to that vision of who's going to be there at the end when we get to that vision. But here, the resistance has really just been in disengagement, just not getting involved. And I think that's where the leader of the culture has to decide ahead of time, ideally, how committed are we to making this change? Because that helps those conversations. And it's no longer me trying to sell this crazy concept of lean, which is still kind of I'm sure being a lean practitioner, it's something that always kind of boggles the mind is, why do I have to sell these concepts to people now if we've been doing this for hundreds of years and it's never not worked? So, but you're still having to sell this to people. And it's usually the people that they know what they know and it's been working for years. So why should I change now? There's risk to now suddenly being someone who isn't the holder of the knowledge. Now I'm learning just like everybody else. And I think that's just scary to everybody else. Right? It's just, it's an uncomfortable position. My previous mentor in my last organization sort of got me into lean. His name was Peter Mialichko. He told me, don't bother with the negative Nancy's, because I was a brand new lean practitioner. I was a supervisor level at an aerospace manufacturing facility working on implementing some work cells and applying some visual standards and standard workbenches and things like that. And I was spending all of my time and energy on these guys that didn't want anything to do with that. They wanted to keep things the way they were. They wanted their own toolboxes. They didn't want to go to company toolboxes, this kind of whole sort of issues. And I'm spending all of my time there and neglecting the people who were energetic and wanted to move things forward. And he pulled me aside and was like, don't worry about the negative Nancy's. Take the people. You have 5 people over here ready to go, ready to drive this for you, ready to work with you to make this change happen, because they can see the benefit. And that energy will wipe away the negative Nancy's will either get on board or they'll get washed away. And so that's sort of the approach that I take here is we're doing our best to just find the people who want to be engaged, engage them as best we can, give them resources, give them some autonomy to move forward with some things. And we've seen the resistance more in the passive, and a little bit of undermining, a little bit of kind of backhanded sort of, doing things to sort of get in the way of some changes. But it doesn't last, right? That type of resistance doesn't usually hold up under the pressure of the rest of the organization that wants to see things improve.
Yeah. Well, Andrew, the theme here, right, is you guys are evolving from smaller contract manufacturer, larger contract manufacturer with more predictability, more systems in place to standardize. Have you noticed that certain people that maybe got the company to where it is now are no longer a good fit because maybe they do better in an environment where there is more creativity? Maybe they're doing small runs of parts and you do have to be a little more creative and standardizing it isn't practical because you might only, do that run one time a year or something.
Yeah. Yeah. There's actually kind of an effort right now in our organization to do exactly that. Not simply for, putting people who are no longer kind of the best aligned to lead an organization that's functioning according to standards and things like that. Although I think that's the case. I think some people that's not the way they're going to function, but they still have a lot of value to add to the organization. They're the experts in whatever process they help develop for the organization. They were here when the first laser arrived, and now they're an expert, right? So we don't want to dismiss that. And so what we're looking to is, we want to engage anybody who will engage with that type of thing and not cast people off. So what we're looking to do is kind of exactly what you described, is to have a group of people we already have it, it's just not cohesive. They're all kind of different, spread throughout the organization. They're the process development people. They're the people who take the new request from the customer and turn that into a process. So as a contract manufacturer, our product is the process, not the part. And so they're the people who develop sort of each step in the process from raw material to shipped product. And so we're in the process now of figuring out the best way to put them into into one group, one conglomerated physical area as well, so that we can really focus on streamlining that without trying to make an entire culture change. Where it may not be necessary to do, because where the standards need to be applied is after the process is stable or defined, right? Properly defined, right? So you can say, here's how it should run. And then from there, you want it to be standardized. But until you know how it should run, you can't really do that. And there's some people who are much better in that kind of chaotic upfront environment than they are in the standard or the stable or standardized environment. And I think that applies to leadership as well as tech. That's something I've learned in the past few years, is sometimes certain types of leaders don't do well with stable not process driven, but kind of routine driven, standard driven organizations. They're better off in the chaos. And so I think that's something else we still need to address as an organization, is how do we select leaders for those different roles so that there can be strengths rather than conflicts between those departments.
Yeah, that's great. Instead of having the conversation, are you on the boat or not on the boat? You're saying maybe you should be on the other boat.
Right. Yeah.
And leveraging those strengths. And I love that innovation story. And even how you phrased it, your business is to rapidly prototype and scale up. That's where you win. So to turn those people loose on that process and support them in that, I think is going to be a real win for you. That's great to hear.
Yeah. And without that, what we end up with in the world we're in now, and I think partly why they wanted to start to make this transition, is the people now that do the process development also have to do all of problem solving, because we haven't broken that sort of information authority dichotomy by having those routines in place. And there's not really a gap between the people who develop the process and the people who are driving the everyday daily production. So when every problem that comes up has to be pitched to the people who created the problem in the first place, you can see there may be some conflict that would arise from that, and a lack of trust and maybe a lack of willingness to be transparent about the problems that people are facing.
Andrew, this has been great. We appreciate you coming on and really appreciate the transparency. I know these are sometimes difficult situations to talk through where an organization's going through this transformation. And I really appreciate your honesty in that not everything works great, right? Like you guys run into challenges, and that's just how it is when you go through, again, a big transformation. So appreciate you coming on and sharing these insights with us.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Voices of Manufacturing podcast with Brian Salee and Michael Mullenberg. This show is brought to you by Dazuki, the premier digital transformation solution that allows manufacturers to standardize operations. Our website, where you can listen to our episodes and find tons of helpful resources, is dazuki.com. Sign up for our monthly newsletter so you'll be the first to know about new episodes. That's dazuki.com, and join us in creating the front line of the future.